Hello and welcome to Off the Page, a newsreel from Eureka, the bookstore for the young. I'm Sahar, here to give you news about new books in each age category. Ada and the Galaxies by Alan Lightman, Olga Pastuchev with illustrations by Susanna Chapman is the story of Ada and her love for the night sky and how living in New York, because of the light pollution, she can't really see it. And so she's really excited to go visit her grandparents on an island in Maine so that she can finally see the stars. And when she gets there, she cannot wait for nightfall, even though she's spending the whole day at the beach. But when it's finally dark, it's foggy, and so her grandfather sits her down and shows her pictures of the galaxies and how big our universe really is. Filled with absolutely stunning watercolor illustrations of the night sky and the ocean, this is a great book not just for early readers, but for anyone who loves the stars. The Sweet Shop Wars by Chatara Rao with illustrations by Rajiv Epe is the story of Firoza and her beloved Dadu's sweet shop, and how one day a rival sweet shop opens next door, beginning to take their customers. Firoza is determined to make sure that her Dadu's sweet shop remains the best in the business, and then she becomes friends with the daughter of the owner of the sweet shop next door, bridging their rivalries. It's kind of impossible not to fall in love with these two girls as you watch this story with its absolutely dynamic illustrations unfold across the pages. A Birthday Present for Aji by Parinita Shetty with illustrations by Andri C. is the story of Jyoti as she goes around her little village trying to find the best birthday present for her Aji. I really love how in this book each character is so distinct, even though most of the time they only get one-line descriptions, and the illustrations really help flesh each character out. This is an absolutely heartwarming story of how everybody in the small village comes together to make sure that this person that they love so much has the best birthday ever. For our young adult readers, we have The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams, a historical fiction novel following Esme as she grows up watching her father and his colleagues put together the very first Oxford English Dictionary, and how she grows up to become part of that process. This book starts in 1887 and then goes up all the way right to the beginning of World War I, following Esme from when she's a young child to when she's in her 40s. And I love when books do that, because following a character for such a long period of time means that you connect to them in a way that we rarely get to. And we get to see her relationships with everybody in her life grow and change. We watch her single father go from this kind of idolized perfect hero to a common man who has his own kind of shortcomings and failings, and how he's trying so hard to provide her with everything that she could possibly need. Because this book takes place over such a large period of time, we get to also watch all the radical changes that were happening at the time, such as the suffragette movement and Esme's own relationship to it. The main story of the book, though, is how Esme has been collecting slips of words and their meanings that kind of go unnoticed by everybody working on the dictionary, and how that kind of changes for her as she grows up. And then she starts collecting words of her own that she knows will never make it into the dictionary, but that she deems important for some reason or the other. This is the story of words and how much they mean to us, and books and how much they mean to us, specifically words and books, and how much they mean to women, and how much they mean to this one woman in particular, and how she goes through her life trying to find herself in them, and how they fail her, how they lift her up, how they carry her through all phases of her life. This is an absolutely wonderful book that I would encourage everyone to pick up. Next up, we have It's Time to Rhyme, Poems for Kids of All Ages by Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan with illustrations by Priya Kurian. Filled with sonnets, limericks, couplets, and more, this book is an absolutely wonderful first introduction to the fun of poetry and poetic devices. Aided by absolutely wonderful illustrations, this book invites you to jump into the world of poetry and write your own. For this video, I was lucky enough to be able to talk to the author, and she was able to answer some of my questions. This is a very innovative way to introduce poetic concepts to young readers. What has your journey to create this book been like?
Many years back, I designed and taught a class called Fun with Poetry as part of a weekend enrichment program for school children. I was surprised by how many of the children were intimidated by that idea of poetry, by what they saw as an inflexible form with rules for rhyme schemes and meter. But by the end of the day, they'd all written poems and had such fun with their own compositions. The idea of a poetry reader that unpacks poetry in an accessible way had been percolating in my mind since that day.
Which part in the making of this book did you enjoy the most? What was the most challenging?
I love reading and writing poems. The meter, the form, the provocative meanings using few words. What was both challenging and enjoyable was introducing the poetic form in its own poetic style, and then providing examples that were more relatable. So, for instance, the sonnet is written in its form, 14 lines with an octave and sestet, and in iambic pentameter with that heartbeat sound of 5 da-dum, 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 the long and short syllables. And then in the example poem, which is much more light-hearted, readers can see the form reflected in fun and surprising ways.
Priya Kurian's illustrations have a way of bringing every poem alive. Share a little about the process of working with Priya as an illustrator.
Well, in most cases, unless the author is an artist as well, the publisher has the prerogative of finding the illustrator. This book is not a picture book, as you know, and the illustrations are thus artistic expressions on the page and not necessarily images that specifically advance the narrative. Priya's art is wonderful and has the perfect whimsy for the humorous and playful poems in the text. I really love her style and her work is very complimentary to our book.
How would you explain the difference between poetry and poems?
One of my favorite descriptions of poetry is from the opening lines of William Blake's poem, The Auguries of Innocence, in which he says that what the poet aspires to is to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Wallace Stevens, the American poet, said something similar, that the poet is the priest of the invisible, suggesting that the poet gives words and voice to deeper truths. To me, especially as a children's writer, what these lines mean is that poetry gives us an opportunity to show the simple aspects of life and describe the little moments in our day in more expansive and expressive ways. Now, you've asked what is a poem and how is it different from poetry? When I think about a poem, I'm reminded of Robert Frost's line. He's another well-known American poet who says, "Poetry begins as a lump in the throat," which suggests to me that the poet must write poems because thoughts must be expressed. So in some ways, poems are what let us get out our feelings and thoughts on a subject, while reading poetry encourages us to connect and find meaning in our experiences.
What has been the feedback from young readers?
This book has only been out about 2 to 3 weeks, and the feedback is only just coming in from young readers. I spoke to about 200 school children this morning, and they had so many wonderful questions to ask after I had read a few poems out to them. So at this point, when you ask about feedback, it's just coming in. But the bookstores I visited to sign books have been very positive in their reception, and adult readers who've been in touch have remarked how much they've enjoyed the book. I've heard from them that my original poetry is fun, it's fascinating. They've also discovered that poetry can show off simple things, just as I suggested, love of food or animals or clothing or anything else. It could be silly or even unusual.
Liked what you saw and heard? Want to buy any of these? Log on to www.eurekabookstore.com and place your order now. Also, follow us on Instagram for a daily feed of books. If you happen to live in Delhi or are just passing by, please drop by at M75 M Block Market, Greater Kailash Part 2. Our team will be more than happy to help you choose books. Please let us know what you liked or didn't, and if you have any suggestions for what else you would like to see, please let us know in the comments down below.